What I've done in here, I've got my jars in there in a pot of boiling water. There's a rack on the bottom. If you don't have a rack, you can put a cloth, you can put just about anything, as long as the jars don't sit on the bottom of the pot, okay? Because you got metal against glass, all right? My mom has jars that are like almost 40 years old. So if you treat them with a little kindness and a little respect, they will last a very long time. That being said, it's glass. So you got to treat it, again, with a little kindness. So when you first buy the jar, always inspect it, make sure they're free of nicks and cracks, because it's glass, it's transported over a long time, because if there's a nick or crack, it won't seal. This is your sealing disc, and this is your screw band. Sealing disc can only be used once. Screw band can be used over and over again. However, that being said, once this is sealed on top, the screw band doesn't have to be there anymore. This is just to keep this in place while it's boiling. So this can come completely off. And what you want to do is take this off and then wipe the inside of this or wash it and put it in a dry place. Because if this is all sticky, stays on there, in the middle of January, you're trying to open this thing, it's all sticky, and then it will rust. So if you take it off, it will last for many, many years. If they rust, throw them out. Many years ago, we discovered when the lids were boiling, they were rubbing against each other, and they would scratch the enamel, and then this would rust. So you would put this on your jar, and then you would process, and if this was rusted, your seal would come undone, okay? So we just tell people just to bring that up to a boil, and then shut the water off and let it sit there until it's hot. Okay, that's all you got to do. So what I do with the jars is I wash them, hot soapy water, then I place them in my canner. This is the first thing you should do, because you'd be amazed how long a big pot of water takes to come to a boil. So people start their relish or whatever, their jams or jellies, and then they say, oh, I need to do my jars. And then they put their jars in, and then their jams, jellies, or relishes are ready, and then sitting there, it gets cold, and then this thing's got to boil. So I always say, do this first. Now you can use a dishwasher, no problem. However, I tell people the jars have to go in the boiling water anyway, so save the cycle, wash them with a little hot soapy water, and then place them in your canner. So when you have this in a pot of boiling water, the pot of boiling water pushes the remaining air that's in there, because that's called headspace. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes as well, called headspace. So when you boil this, it pushes out the headspace, and when you remove this from the boiling water, the atmospheric pressure makes this sealing seal, and then removes the remaining air out, okay? And that's what that does, okay? I've done many canned where I don't hear the pop, but I go back, I go later, and I try it, and it's sealed. So sometimes you'll hear it, and sometimes you won't, but even though you don't hear it, it doesn't mean it hasn't sealed. Give it a few hours, usually within, if you boil everything, I have never had a jar that's not sealed on me if I boil it correctly. I say correctly. There's a few extra steps as well that you got to know about this, okay? The oven is a very dangerous thing to do. I worked for, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Okay, Kraft Foods makes Certo, as you all know, which is pectin. I worked for Kraft for 10 years, and Certo was my brand that I worked on for 2 years. And these are all pectins. We're going to talk about this in a while as well. Kraft advocates to sterilize jars in the oven. What happens is, and it's a big no-no, I'll tell you what. What happens is, in an oven, heat is not always distributed evenly. So some spots are 190, 195, 200. You know when you bake a cake or cookies and the corner lifts and the top lifts and some, right? That heat is not distributed evenly. So when you sterilize a jar in the oven and you place something hot in there, the jar can actually shatter. What I always tell people, get yourself organized, get your equipment out, get it all laid out, get your pot boiling, and then that way you don't waste a lot of time, right? This is metal, okay? And you got a boiling pot of water or boiling jar on cold, hard surface. So I always work on protected. Even if I was working on this, I would put a cloth on this. Always, always, always put a cloth. Because again, you're working with a boiling pot and boiling water, so you want to make sure that your jars are protected, okay? So I want to make sure that the ring is clean, the top of the jar is clean. And then I take this. Oh, there's some reaction. And then what you want to do is fingertip tight, okay? The reason why you put this on fingertip tight is because there's air in there at the moment. So when you put this back into the water and it's got to boil, the air has got to push out, right? If this thing is on too tight, that air is going to go somewhere. It's going to go up or down. It goes up, this lid buckles, and then you lose all your product. It goes down, the bottom pops out. So all you got to do is fingertip tight, and that's all. Place it in the water. This is not really packed that. Yeah, this is not packed that well, but the dill pickles, yeah, should really be packed tightly. Absolutely.
In the 9-day.
This is a headspace gauge from Bernardin. That's a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch. All of our recipes will indicate processing time and headspace. Okay? Alum is a product. It is. Alum is a product that we used to use to keep pickles crisp. Okay? This is pickle crisp. Something similar. Something similar. But some people cannot digest alum. It makes for the tummy very bad. So they sort of, it's not illegal, but for some people, it makes their tummy really nasty. So that is more advisable to use. I usually tell people any type of large fruit or chunky, something chunky, tomatoes, something like that, make sure you get all the air pockets out. This, not a lot of air pockets in there. It's a liquid. I'm not going to really worry about it.
Like a pickle.
Like a pickle, like a big fruit, you use something plastic. You don't want to use metal in glass. Again, metal weakens glass. So you just go in like this, type it, tap it a little bit, get all the air pockets out. Yeah, something like that. When you're doing the long boil without using pectin, you pop a little plate in the freezer. You boil your jam or jelly. When you think it's looking thickening, you take it off the heat, okay? Because if you keep on boiling it, it can keep on cooking. Take it off the heat, take a teaspoon of the product, put it on your freezer plate, tilt your plate towards the floor. If it sits where it's at, it means it's ready to be canned. Okay? If it runs down the plate, it's still got to be cooked. So place it back on the heat, keep on cooking it. But the thing about those things, you got to stir and stir because it's got to boil. So typically, I would shut the heat off. When I'm doing fruit, I would typically shut the heat off, let that simmer, because what's going to happen is when I take that jar out, the atmospheric pressure that's around it, it's going to keep on boiling and it's going to make that juice go overflow. It's called siphoning. It might do it, it might not, but I'm going to pull it out anyway. So what you want to do is shut the heat off, let that jar sit in there for the next 5 minutes so it gets accustomed to the heat change, and then remove it. But I'm going to do it anyway and see what happens. Yeah, you got to let them sit there. Like they should stay there for 24 hours without moving. There's 2 reasons why we tell people to process jars. Okay, one of them is to remove any possible potential bacteria, mold that could be in your vegetables. I say possible and potential. It could be present. Secondly, the boiling process is going to guarantee that seal because the atmospheric pressure is boiling that stuff, pushing the air out. Thus, when it cools down, it's going to suck that lid back in. It'll guarantee your seal. I have never had a jar not seal on me because I process everything all the time. Okay? Always. The best way to do it.